Have you ever had someone walk into your life at exactly the right moment? I'm not talking about fate in the romantic movie sense, not someone who sweeps you off your feet with grand gestures, but someone who changes something inside you without even trying. Someone who sees you when you're not sure who you are anymore. Someone who holds on to you in ways the rest of the world never even notices. For Johnny Depp, that person was Kate Moss. And here's the thing, for 2 decades, he didn't really talk about it. The story of Johnny and Kate was left to live in old photographs, tabloid headlines, and whispers from the 90s. The public saw the beautiful chaos, the style, the parties. But they didn't see what was really going on. They didn't hear the private conversations, the quiet reassurances, the way they held each other together. Until now. When Johnny finally spoke about Kate after all those years, he didn't dwell on the drama. He didn't drag out the old fights or feed the gossip machine. Instead, he said something that stopped people in their tracks: "She saved me." 2 simple words, but they hold so much. What did he mean? Saved him from what? And why say it now, after so much time has passed? To understand it, you have to go back. Back to the mid-90s, when their worlds first collided. It was 1994. Johnny was already the kind of actor Hollywood couldn't quite control. He'd made his name playing outsiders, misfits, characters with a heartbeat you could feel through the screen. He was unpredictable, charming, and, to the press, irresistible. Kate Moss was only 20 years old, but she was already one of the most famous models on the planet. She had this almost impossible mix of vulnerability and confidence. In an era of perfect, polished supermodels, Kate was different. She was raw. Real. She didn't need to pretend. When they met, it wasn't just attraction. It was magnetism. 2 people living in fast-moving, high-pressure worlds suddenly found someone who understood exactly what that felt like. From the outside, they looked like the ultimate it couple. Every photo of them together seemed to tell a story: the smoky bars, the late nights, the red carpets. But if you were close enough to see the truth, you'd know their connection wasn't about the glamour. It was about survival. Johnny was under constant pressure. Acting wasn't just a job for him, it was a way of life. Every role took something out of him. Every film meant disappearing into another version of himself. And in between, there were the interviews, the flashing cameras, the endless opinions from strangers who thought they knew him. That kind of life can eat away at you if you don't have something real to hold on to. Kate became that something real. She wasn't trying to fix him. She wasn't trying to change him. She simply got him. She knew when he needed to be left alone, and when he needed someone to sit beside him in silence. She knew when to push him to talk, and when to let the quiet do the work. In public, they had their wild side. They were young, in love, and unapologetically themselves. They didn't hide from the nightlife or the parties. But behind closed doors, it was often much simpler: late-night conversations, music playing softly in the background, the comfort of knowing someone had your back when the rest of the world wanted a piece of you. Of course, the media didn't see that. They saw the fights outside hotels, the rumors, the headlines that made them sound toxic. And maybe, at times, they were fiery. Passion that strong doesn't always stay calm. But it wasn't the chaos that defined them. It was the way they anchored each other in the middle of it. Still, love that burns that brightly often burns fast. They were both constantly on the move. His work took him to sets around the world. Her modeling career meant she was flying from city to city, living out of suitcases, stepping into a dozen different realities in a week. That kind of distance is hard for anyone, even people who aren't living under a microscope. Eventually, the cracks started to show. Misunderstandings. Missed calls. The feeling of being close, but never really together long enough to catch their breath. And then, it was over. Just like that. The breakup became public news. But unlike so many celebrity splits, there wasn't a public war. No back-and-forth interviews, no bitter quotes. Just silence. And that's how it stayed for more than 20 years. In that time, both of them lived entire lives. Decades have a way of shaping people in ways you can't predict. For Johnny, those 20 years were a whirlwind of peaks that touched the sky and valleys that felt like the ground had given way beneath him. There were the years when his career seemed unstoppable. Blockbuster films, awards, roles that became cultural icons. Jack Sparrow turned him into a global figure unlike anything he'd experienced before, a character so beloved it became part of his identity in the eyes of the public. But with that kind of fame comes a strange price. The lines between the man and the myth began to blur. People stopped seeing Johnny and started seeing only the characters he played, the headlines about his life, the gossip that swirled around him. And there were the lows, the kind that make the front page for all the wrong reasons. Public battles in courtrooms, tabloid wars that painted him as everything from a hero to a villain, moments where his personal life became the spectacle. It was the kind of scrutiny that can drain a person, make them question who they really are beneath the noise. Friendships shifted. Some disappeared. Some became stronger. But every step, whether up or down, left its mark. Kate, in her own world, was living a life just as intense, though in a different spotlight. She continued to dominate the fashion industry long after many of her peers had faded from the covers. She became more than a model, she became a symbol of an era, of a certain effortless cool that couldn't be manufactured. She worked with the biggest designers, graced the most coveted runways, and redefined what it meant to have longevity in an industry obsessed with youth and reinvention. But fashion, for all its beauty, is also a battlefield. Behind the perfect photo shoots were pressures that few outside the industry could understand. Every appearance was judged, every campaign dissected. She faced her own personal struggles, the ones the public only caught glimpses of in rumors or unflattering headlines. Yet, like Johnny, she learned to navigate it. She built her own legacy, not just as a model but as a businesswoman and cultural icon. She found ways to keep parts of herself private, guarded from the hungry eyes of the press. In those 2 decades, their lives ran parallel but never touched. They didn't show up at the same events. There were no chance photographs of them crossing paths at parties or award shows. If they ever spoke privately, no one knew. And maybe that was intentional. Maybe they both understood that the only way to preserve what they had shared was to keep it out of the circus. For the public, that chapter was closed. Whatever they had once been to each other was sealed in the past, frozen in those hazy 90s photographs, Johnny in his leather jackets and disheveled hair, Kate in her slip dresses and cigarette in hand, both of them impossibly young and untouchable. And then, something shifted. After 20 years, Johnny opened up. No fanfare. No dramatic build-up. Just a moment, and a few words that cut through decades of silence. What he said wasn't what anyone expected. He didn't dig up old wounds. He didn't replay the conflicts or revisit the reasons it ended. There was no bitterness, no blame. He talked about gratitude. It's rare, isn't it? How many people can look back on a relationship from decades ago and feel only thankfulness for it? Most of us, if we're honest, remember the sting first, the arguments, the disappointment, the feeling of loss. But Johnny chose to remember the light. The good. The way she had been there when he needed her most. She saved me. Those 3 words held more weight than any scandal the tabloids had tried to pin on them. It wasn't the kind of saving you see in movies, no last-minute chases through airports, no grand confessions in the rain. It was quieter. More intimate. The kind of saving that happens in unspoken moments, in the way someone reminds you of who you are when you've started to forget. Johnny didn't need to elaborate for people to feel the truth of it. Anyone who's ever been pulled out of a dark place by someone's presence. Not their solutions, not their advice, just their presence, knows exactly what he meant. Kate had been that person for him. Back in those days, when fame was both a gift and a curse, she'd been an anchor. Amid the parties and the headlines, there had been mornings where the world outside felt too loud, and she was the one who made it quiet. There had been moments where the expectations of who he was supposed to be felt suffocating, and she reminded him he was allowed to just be Johnny. And the beauty of it is, she probably didn't even realize the full extent of what she was doing. That's the thing about truly saving someone, it often doesn't come from dramatic gestures. It comes from the everyday kindnesses, the consistent presence, the way you make someone feel like they're worth something when the world is telling them otherwise. For 20 years, he'd carried that gratitude quietly. And then, when he finally spoke it out loud, it became clear that what they had shared wasn't something time could erase. It wasn't defined by the fact that they didn't end up together. It wasn't ruined by the breakup or diminished by the years apart. It was intact, living in the way he still chose to talk about her, with respect, with warmth, with acknowledgement of the role she'd played in his life. It's a rare thing to see in the world of celebrity, where so many past relationships are spoken about with caution or avoided entirely. Johnny's honesty was disarming because it was so simple. He wasn't trying to rewrite history to make himself look good. He wasn't using her name to generate headlines. He was just telling the truth. And in a way, that's a testament to both of them. They didn't drag their past into the spotlight for entertainment. They let it rest. They let it belong to them. And maybe that's why, when he finally did speak, it meant something. Because gratitude, when it's real, has a way of surviving everything else. She saved me. Think about how rare that is. In a world where so many people, after a breakup, can't help but replay the worst memories over and over, here was someone choosing to focus on the best. Most of us, if we're honest, have a tendency to guard ourselves by rewriting the past. We highlight the moments that hurt us, we sharpen the flaws, we minimize the joy, not because those things weren't real, but because remembering them too fondly feels dangerous. It's easier to move on when you convince yourself it wasn't worth holding on to in the first place. But Johnny didn't do that. He didn't filter their history through bitterness. He didn't let the end of the relationship erase the meaning it had while it existed. Instead, he carried with him a quiet acknowledgement of what Kate had been to him during one of the most intense chapters of his life. He remembered the way she stood by him when he felt surrounded, not just by people, but by noise, the kind of noise that comes from the press, from public opinion, from the expectations of an industry that feeds on image and spectacle. And that's what makes his words feel different. She saved me wasn't about some cinematic rescue scene. It wasn't about her pulling him out of some obvious, dramatic crisis in a way the public could see. It was about the little things, the small, invisible acts of care that most people never notice unless they've been on the receiving end of them. Being saved in that way means having someone who notices the subtle signs, the shift in your voice when you're trying to sound okay but you're not, the way you get quiet when something's bothering you, the restless energy that means you're carrying more than you're saying. It's the person who catches those things without you having to spell them out, and instead of demanding explanations, they simply give you what you need in that moment, whether that's space, or a hand to hold, or a distraction that makes you forget, just for a little while, how heavy things feel. Johnny remembered how Kate did that for him. How she reminded him of who he really was when the world was trying to mold him into something else. And that's no small thing. When you're at the height of fame, when every stranger thinks they know you, it's easy to start losing sight of yourself. You start to become the version of you that people project onto you, the charming interview guest, the rebellious movie star, the headline. And in the process, the private, human part of you starts to fade. Having someone there who sees past all of that and talks to you like you're just you, not a persona, not a symbol, not a career, is grounding in a way that's hard to describe. It's not glamorous. It's not loud. It's quiet and consistent, and it works its way into your bones until you realize you're still standing partly because that person helped steady you when you were about to tip over. The truth is, that kind of saving doesn't look impressive from the outside. It's not the stuff of gossip columns. There's no scandal in it, no explosive story to tell. It happens in those in-between moments, sitting on the floor talking until the sun comes up, sharing a cigarette on a balcony in the cold just to have a few minutes of peace, turning up at your door after a bad day without asking questions. It's not about fixing everything for you, it's about making you feel like you don't have to fix it all alone. And maybe that's why, when he looked back, those were the things Johnny held on to. Not the glamour, not the chaos, not the messy ending, but the human part. The part that mattered most. Because sometimes the most profound way someone can save you is simply by staying when it would have been easier to walk away. By giving you the kind of loyalty that doesn't ask for anything in return. By showing up on the days when you're not much fun to be around, when you're short-tempered or withdrawn or drowning in self-doubt. That's the thing about storms, they're not always visible to everyone. Some storms happen entirely inside you, and only a few people can see the signs. Kate, for Johnny, was one of those people. She noticed. She cared. And she acted, not with speeches or ultimatums, but with a presence that said, "You're not alone." And that's what makes his words so rare. Because gratitude like that doesn't fade with time. If anything, it grows. The further away you get from those moments, the more you see them for what they really were. You realize how much they shaped you, how they kept you from going under when the current was strongest. Most people, decades later, would let pride or pain get in the way of saying something like that out loud. But Johnny didn't. He put it simply, honestly, without embellishment, "She saved me." And maybe that's why those words hit harder than any romantic speech could. Because they were real. Because they weren't meant to impress anyone. They were just the truth. Kate didn't just stand next to Johnny when things were easy. She stood there when it wasn't. She didn't feed the version of him the tabloids created. She saw the man behind the image. And in doing that, she gave him something he couldn't find anywhere else at the time, peace. But here's the part people don't always like to admit, sometimes, the person who saves you isn't meant to stay in your life forever. They're meant to help you through a chapter. And when that chapter is done, so is their role. It doesn't mean the love wasn't real. It doesn't mean the connection wasn't deep. It just means life moved forward, and so did you. Johnny gets that. And that's why, even now, he can look back without bitterness. The gratitude lasts longer than the pain. It's a rare kind of honesty. One that reminds us that not every relationship has to end in disaster or resentment. Sometimes, it ends in a quiet kind of love that just shifts form. So, can one person really save another? Maybe not in the way the movies make it look. But can they come into your life at exactly the moment you need them and help you find your footing again? Absolutely. And sometimes, that's enough to change you forever. Kate Moss did that for Johnny Depp. And 2 decades later, he's still willing to say it out loud. And maybe that's the lesson here for the rest of us. That it's okay to remember people for the good they brought into our lives, even if they're not part of our lives anymore. That some connections are meant to be cherished, not erased.